Solicitors, whatever your view of them is, you'd likely assume that they know a thing or two about the law. Not that you'd need to be a legal expert to know not to commit murder. Today, we look at the case of Herbert Rowse Armstrong, a once successful solicitor and ex-army major who later became known as the Dandelion Poisoner. Herbert Rowse Armstrong was born in Plymouth, Devon in 1869. Though his parents were by no means well off, they saved diligently so he could attend the prestigious St. Katharine's College at Cambridge University. Herbert graduated with a law degree in 1895, completed a master's in 1901, and soon had an offer from a well-known practice in Newton Abbot. Whilst he initially accepted the position, Newton Abbot didn't offer the prestige or reputation he desired, so when an opportunity presented itself to move to Hay-on-Wye in Breconshire, he relished the chance to make a name for himself. It wasn't long after he arrived that he married Katherine "Kitty" Friend, whom he had met during his time in Newton Abbot. They lived in a large home called Mayfield, which still stands today. Mayfield was a handsome home surrounded by many flower beds, which appealed to Herbert due to his long-held passion for gardening. Much stress was relieved by spending hours tending to his garden. He put particular effort into ridding the soil of dandelion weeds and produced his own concoctions for tackling them, using a combination of arsenic and store-bought weed killer. Mayfield was kept well, and outwardly Herbert and Kitty had a happy marriage, resulting in 3 children. Meanwhile, he continued to earn a name for himself whilst working at the legal practice which had paid for his relocation to the area. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Cheese, had taken him on and shown him the ropes of the practice. They had been born and raised in the area and as such had a prestigious reputation amongst the residents there. It didn't take long for Herbert to be introduced to the Cheese's many friends, giving him the opportunity to finally rub shoulders with the creme de la creme of local society. Herbert would go on to become a prominent member of the Hay Lodge Freemasons and a church warden. Strangely, despite being relatively fit and well, both Mr. and Mrs. Cheese died within days of each other in the summer of 1906. Naturally, Herbert succeeded the practice and took up position as the managing partner. But despite his relative success and burgeoning popularity, Herbert's home life was unpleasant, to say the least. His wife Kitty was said to be a domineering woman. Herbert stood at just over 5 foot tall and weighed just over 7 stone, or roughly 45 kilograms. Katherine was taller and sturdier built, but it wasn't just her physical appearance which dwarfed her husband. Katherine was known as a controlling and overbearing wife. She ensured Herbert and their 3 children adhered to strict rules with no room for leniency, often admonishing them even when out in public. She only allowed her husband to smoke in one room of the house. He wasn't to drink unless unwell, and she would often cut short social outings, claiming it was bath night and therefore they must return home early. Over the years, Herbert had grown tired of what he perceived as controlling behaviour, but he would receive some form of respite in 1914 when, due to the outbreak of war, he was enrolled to serve in the military. He had previously served in the Territorial Force, Britain's reserve army, where he achieved the rank of captain. During his time in the army, he would briefly serve in France and gain a promotion to the rank of major. After returning from France, Herbert spent the following years travelling the country extensively. His newfound liberation from the oppressive Mayfield house was not wasted. During his travels, he was known to have pursued a number of affairs, mainly with much younger women. One such meeting he had while stationed at Christchurch, Dorset, would later prove fateful. However, Herbert's gallivanting wasn't to last. When the war ended in 1918, he returned to his civilian life and all that came with it. He resumed his legal practice, and Katherine's control over his life resumed. During his absence, the only other legal practice in the area, Griffiths, based across the road from his office, had grown in popularity. The elderly owner was talking about retirement, and Herbert saw a perfect opportunity to join forces with the newly appointed young partner, Oswald Martin. Herbert proposed such an arrangement to Martin, and whilst his offer was declined, for a while the two practices worked cordially alongside each other, often representing the opposing sides of legal agreements such as property transfers and the like. In August 1920, just over a year after Herbert had returned from war, Katherine began to fall ill. Over the following weeks, she complained of vomiting, fevers, visions, and the partial paralysis of her hands and feet. Her condition worsened despite interventions from doctors, and eventually the decision was made to commit her to an asylum. Such was her delirium. Once admitted, her condition appeared to improve, and within 6 months she was deemed well enough to return to Mayfield House once more on January 22nd, 1921. But once she returned home, she deteriorated rapidly, displaying the same symptoms she had experienced before. But this time, she weakened much more quickly. On February 22nd, exactly 1 month after returning home, Katherine died. Her cause of death was recorded as gastritis, an inflammation of the stomach, heart disease, and kidney failure. Her final words were said to be, "I'm not going to die, am I? I have so much to live for, my husband and my children." Just 4 people attended her funeral, with Herbert said to have appeared cheery and upbeat despite his wife's passing. Katherine's will was read soon after, and everything she owned had been left to him. The will was dated just 1 month before her admission to the asylum and superseded a will in which she had left everything to her children. In the weeks after Katherine died, Herbert held a number of dinner parties at his house. Friends observed he seemed relieved to have discovered a newfound freedom without his controlling wife in the picture. He continued with his practice, but soon became embroiled in a lengthy and therefore costly dispute with Oswald Martin. They were representing opposing sides of a property transfer for which negotiations had soured, and Herbert now owed a sum of £500 to Martin, roughly £27,000 today. It was around this time a box of expensive chocolates was delivered to Martin's home. Despite them having no name or tag from the sender, the chocolates were gratefully received and soon shared at a dinner party. However, it didn't take long for one of the dinner guests to become exceedingly unwell. A doctor was called, and the chocolates were soon identified as being the source of the problem. It was discovered that each of the sweets had a tiny hole in the bottom, and when sent for testing, the filling in the chocolates was found to contain arsenic. The concentration was such that had a person consumed more than 2 portions, they would surely have been killed. But police had no way of identifying who sent the chocolates, so no further investigation was carried out. Not long after this, Martin noticed a change in Herbert's behaviour. Despite still owing Martin money, Herbert had started to show up at his practice regularly. He would often ask Martin over for lunch or afternoon tea. He even approached Mrs. Martin and asked the same. Invites would be left on his desk or in his mailbox. After 3 months of such incessant invites, Martin finally agreed and visited Mayfield House for lunch. Herbert appeared delighted at the opportunity to host his friend come business rival. He laid out a tea table in the drawing room with all manner of sandwiches and sweets upon it. Though they talked about business, the £500 debt was not mentioned. At one point, Herbert selected a scone from the spread and handed it to Martin. It was still warm, smothered in melted butter and freshly whipped cream. Martin indulged in the treat and soon had another, along with a number of cups of tea. Once the discussions came to a natural close, Martin returned home just in time for supper with his wife. Later that evening, Oswald Martin fell ill, with his symptoms growing worse over the course of the night. The next day, his wife called Dr. Hinks to the house. Hinks was the same doctor that had treated Mrs. Armstrong during her sickness and who had previously been called to the Martin household after the chocolate poisoning. He knew Oswald's sickness had come on soon after he ate supper with his wife and maid, but as they were suffering no ill effects, he deduced it must have been something he ate whilst with Herbert. Not wishing to cause alarm, however, he simply continued to treat Oswald's symptoms and sent a urine sample away to be analysed in London. Sure enough, it contained extremely high levels of arsenic. Oswald had stabilised, but the bigger problem was the apparent link between the mysterious illnesses and death in a short space of time, all associated with arsenic poisoning. The police were notified of the arsenic found in the chocolates, along with details of Katherine's passing and the more recent attempt on Martin's life. Scotland Yard were called and very quickly identified Herbert as the common link between the three cases, and it was well known that he regularly ordered arsenic in order to control the weeds at Mayfield House. A plan was hatched to monitor Herbert, but they needed to take utmost care to conceal the investigation. In a small town, word spreads quickly, and given Herbert's high standing and his legal profession, police could ill afford for word to get out about who they suspected in the poisoning. They went to great lengths in this endeavour, with investigators interviewing witnesses in the dark of night and leaving the town again before the sun rose. They gathered the evidence of Herbert's arsenic purchases from the local pharmacist, along with medical notes from Dr. Hinks. With this information, police applied for a warrant to arrest Herbert for the attempted murder of Martin. They also secured an exhumation order for Katherine's body in order that they could assess if there was anything suspicious in her passing. On New Year's Eve 1921, police arrested Herbert Rowse Armstrong at his legal offices. Once in custody, Katherine's body was exhumed and testing of her remains showed presence of a lethal dose of arsenic, and her murder was added to Herbert's charges. Herbert protested his innocence throughout his arrest and eventual trial. His attitude was so confident and his claims so convincing that many in the town decried his arrest. Many friends believed he had been framed, and most pointed the finger at his rival, Oswald Martin. His trial began on the 3rd of April 1921, and throughout, Herbert's familiarity with court was evident. He knew the judge and was on first-name terms with the prosecution lawyers. His testimony was delivered steadily. He often smiled and was courteous towards those involved in proceedings. He claimed that Kitty had been depressed and suicidal, and that she had found and taken his arsenic in order to end her life. The prosecution countered this by stating that she would have been too weak in the week leading up to her death to have even left her bed. They also said her final words, spoken to a nurse, asking if she was going to die and saying she had so much to live for, showed that she had no intention of taking her life. They also brought forward the woman who Herbert had had an affair with in Christchurch, who said that she and Mr. Armstrong had met in London several weeks after his wife's death, where he mentioned the prospect of marriage. Despite this, reporters packed the courtroom each day, and their stories were consistent in their belief that Herbert would be declared innocent. On the 13th of April 1922, the jury returned its findings. They had apparently not read the script and did not accept Herbert's claims that Katherine had committed suicide and that the evidence pointing to him in Martin's case was circumstantial at best. Indeed, they found him guilty on all counts. With that, Herbert Rowse Armstrong was sentenced to death by hanging. His appeals failed, and on the 31st of May 1922, he was walked from his cell to the gallows at Gloucester Prison. He maintained his innocence until the end, turning down an offer of £5,000 to admit his guilt. According to the executioner, Herbert's final words were, "Kitty, I'm coming to you." He remains the only lawyer in Britain's history to be convicted of murder and hanged for his crime. In 1972, the Solicitors, where Armstrong had worked, was taken over by Martin Beales, who also moved into Armstrong's old home. In the 90s, Beales began investigating the case and wrote a book where he posits the notion that Armstrong was in fact innocent and may have been framed by a jealous rival. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments below. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next time with another story to make you say, "Well, I never."